What is up, everybody, and welcome to this video where I will be walking us through on how to request and validate an SSL certificate using AWS ACM and doing that with the CDK. Now, what you'll notice on the screen is that I've already generated my project that I'll be working in using the CDK init app -- language, and in this case I'm using TypeScript. The other thing I've already done is to do the bootstrapping of the environment for deploying our stack essentially, right? I've already exported the profile that I'll be using to deploy into the correct account. So our environment is essentially ready to make deployments, right? But in order to do that on your end, what you'll have to do is to go through the process, and I'm assuming that you are familiar with the CDK. You can set things up and you can get your profile ready. And with that said, let's get started, right? So if you look at the screen, we are on the entry point of our application essentially, right? Where we have some demo code, essentially just the bootstrapped code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up, because this is where our own essentially our own ACM construct is going to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is we'll be working in the lib folder here. So I'm going to create a folder called constructs. And you want to think of constructs essentially as modules in which you are able to you can use them to repeatedly create the same resource essentially. And in our construct here, we'll have essentially a resource that allows us to create a certificate, and we can then be able to use that over and over again. Now, you can have a situation where you put various AWS's resources together that then allow you to essentially create a collection of resources that work together. Right, in the constructs folder, I'm going to have ACM, and inside of ACM, I'm going to have ACM.ts. Remember, we're working in TypeScript, right? So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to import construct from constructs, right? And then I'm going to export a class called ACM, which extends construct, okay? Then in the constructor itself, we're going to have a scope, that takes the construct as a type. We're going to have an ID that takes an ID as a string of type string, and then we're going to have props, right? Now I'm going to come back to props there, and then in super we're going to pass essentially the scope and the ID to the stack in this way, right? Cool, and we should be good. Now you'll notice that props is complaining. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say it's conditional. That's the first thing. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface here. So I'm going to say export interface, and I'll call this ACM props. Essentially, these are properties that we'll be passing to our construct for it to then be able to create the certificate essentially. And what we want passed into this is the domain name, which will be of type string, and the next thing that we want passed here is alternative names for the certificate, and that will also be of type string, but it'll be expecting a list. Now what we'll do is we'll pass in that interface of ACM props in here, and that should be enough to sort that issue out. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say public. We're going to create a property here which is going to be read only, and we're going to call it ACM. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in everything as ACM from essentially the core libraries here. Lib is AWS certificate manager. I'm going to bring in everything, and having brought everything, I'm going to set this to type certificate, right? Cool. Now what we want to do inside of our constructor, we're going to say ACM, and then we're going to say new ACM dot certificate, and we're going to pass it this, and then we're going to pass it the ID. Now how I like to do with the ID situation is that it's going to come I'm going to say ACM, so it's going to come from the ID that's passed in when this is instantiated, and then dash ACM essentially. Then we'll pass it the props, which is the domain name, which is going to come from our props dot domain name, and then actually this is required. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to make this required, so that this guy doesn't complain. Just do that. Cool. All right, so now, and then we're going to pass it the subject alternative names. And that's going to come from props dot alternative names in my case. And then one thing we need to set up is to then say how we're going to validate the certificate. Remember, there's two ways we can validate it. It's either we're going to use an email address, right, or we're going to use DNS names, right. Now, if we're going to use DNS, we're going to have to think of two things right here, and that is, do we have a hosted zone in AWS? Because if we have that, then we can pass it in this next step that we're going to be doing. If we don't, it means we have our domains elsewhere. And what that essentially means is that in validating the certificate, we'll have to then manually copy over CNAME records and do that and copy those over to our service provider, right? So validation, we're going to say acm.certificate validation, and then we're going to say from DNS, right? Now, if we had a hosted zone, we would pass it here. We would pass it as, let's say, hosted zone. We would pass it here as an argument, but obviously we don't. And because we don't pass anything, the assumption, which is a safe one, is that we have a service provider that this domain is sitting in, and in order to validate our ownership of it, we'll just simply paste in those name records over there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to be able to output the ARN of this, ARN, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say acm.certificate ARN, and in order to then output, I'm going to say cfn output, okay, and I'm going to, sorry, this is actually a class, so I'm going to say certificate, I'm going to call it certificate ARN. I'm going to say the value is the certificate ARN over here, and that's our construct. It's done, right? Now all we have to do is come and bring in our construct. Yeah, so I'm going to say import, I'm going to import from constructs ACM, right? Cool. And then I'm going to do is say ACM, there it is. Then here we're going to say ACM, I'll say certificate manager, and I'm going to say const certificate here, and then I'm going to say new ACM, right? I'm going to pass it this, pass it an ID, and I'm going to call it cloud space, and then I'm going to pass it the domain name, in which case it's going to be cloud space.co.za, and then in terms of the alternative names, rather, I'm going to say asterisk and then cloud space.co.za here again. Cool. Now that's it, right? We've created an instance of ACM here, and then we're passing it the props to then begin doing this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say CDK deploy, and this should begin the process of deploying our certificate here. Now, one thing you will notice is that from my perspective, deploying this is getting this validated is not going to take a long time, and the simple reason for that is because what I have done already is on my service provider, I've actually created or put the CNAME records on there. You're probably wondering how. Well, when I've worked with certificates before, and so I've kind of like, to quicken the process here, at first I created this certificate, got the CNAMEs and put them on that service provider, deleted them, and then started over to kind of demonstrate the process to you. And so mine will validate quite quickly. Yours will not do that, right? There's a chance it might not do that. So and so what you'll have to do is, and I'll show you on the screen, let me see if this, yeah, so creation is complete. So if you come here to certificates and I refresh, you'll notice mine is still pending, and yours will most likely be still pending as well. And so what you'll have to do is you'll have to come into the certificate itself and copy these to a service provider. What do I mean by that? So for example, this is my service provider, and what that implies is that I'll then have to copy the CNAME and paste it here, right, which I've already done. Then I'll copy that, and I'll paste it over here, and I'll do the same for this one over this domain over here. Once both of these have been copied over, then ACM at some point will do some sort of validation step, and as you can see, mine has been issued already because I've already done that, and yours will be issued by doing virtually the same thing. So yeah, that's it pretty much. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found value in this video, and I do appreciate your time. Should you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you if you do need any assistance or help with something like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will definitely catch you in the next video.